It's past midnight in Washington, but it may be a stormy morning for global trade. US President Donald Trump's tariffs have kicked in. Marking the occasion with late-night post on Truth Social, Trump declared that billions of dollars would in fact start flowing into the United States from countries that, in his view here, have long taken economic advantage of Washington. Now, the new tariffs announced under the executive order titled Further Modifying the Reciprocal Tariff Rates impact nearly 70 countries. Now, tariff rate ranges from 10% all the way to 40%. US President Donald Trump has issued an executive order imposing an additional 25% tariff on goods from India. Now, this comes days after he issued a threat to New Delhi over its purchase of oil from Russia. Indian goods will now face tariffs up to 50% after Trump's latest move. The White House, meanwhile, said the decision is aimed at strengthening measures taken to undo earlier sanctions against Russia following its actions in Ukraine. The US president had announced a 25% tariff on India last week. Now, in a sharp rebuke to Trump, PM Modi stressed that India will never compromise with the interests of its farmers as well as its fishermen. Now, the PM's remark come after the MEA also condemned the United States' decision to impose additional tariffs, calling the move unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. Listen into what PM Modi and Trump had to say.
साथियों, हमारे लिए अपने किसानों का हित सर्वोच्च प्राथमिकता है। भारत अपने किसानों के, पशुपालकों के और मछुआरे भाई बहनों के हितों के साथ कभी भी समझौता नहीं करेगा। और मैं जानता हूं व्यक्तिगत रूप से मुझे बहुत बड़ी कीमत चुकानी पड़ेगी, लेकिन मैं इसके लिए तैयार हूं। मेरे देश के किसानों के लिए, मेरे देश के मछुआरों के लिए, मेरे देश के पशुपालकों के लिए आज भारत तैयार है।
You know, we put a 50% tariff on India on oil. They're the second largest. They're very close to China in terms of the purchase of oil from Russia.
If you do reach a deal with Ukraine and Russia, would you drop the additional tariffs on India?
Well, we'll determine that later, but right now they're paying a 50% tariff. Okay.
Indian officials have said that there are other countries that are buying Russian oil.
It's okay.
Like China, for instance,
It's
buys
okay.
more.
Yeah.
Why are you singling India out for these additional sanctions?
It's only been 8 hours. So let's see what happens over the next.
Sanctions.
You're going to see a lot more.
So this is a taste of
You're going to see a lot more. You're going to see so much secondary sanctions.
Trump has also suggested that China could be the next target of steep new tariffs similar to those just imposed on India. Now, while China has been given the 90-day window when asked whether Beijing could face penalties for importing Russian oil, Trump said, and I quote here, "could happen, depends on how we do it." Now, he warned reporters to expect a lot more secondary sanctions aimed at pressuring countries that continue energy trade with Russia. Meanwhile, China was not named in the executive order that doubled tariffs on Indian goods. The Treasury has already cautioned Beijing about possible economic consequences. Trump's comments further raise the stakes for the US-China trade ties, with fresh tariffs and sanctions once again looming large. Here's more.
China is facing potential secondary sanctions for Russian oil. Then having that tariff or sanction rather or not hinges on what going forward?
It may happen. I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you yet, but we did it with India. We're doing it probably with a couple of others. One of them could be China.
Shifting our focus to the Far East, where National Security Advisor Ajit Doval is in fact in Moscow to discuss India-Russia defense and security cooperation, as well as India's purchases of Russian oil. Reports suggest Doval is also likely to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. Staying with Russia, Trump also plans to meet Russian President Putin as early as next week and follow it up with a three-way meeting that in fact includes Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as well. Now, without any European leaders present, mind you. Now, the planned meetings came to light during a phone call Trump held on Wednesday with several European leaders. He reportedly told leaders that he plans to meet Putin soon and hopes to bring Zelensky into a follow-up meeting shortly after. Meanwhile, listen into what the US president had to say.
Well, there's a very good prospect that they will. And we haven't determined where, but we had some very good talks with President Putin today. And there's a very good chance that we could be ending the round, ending the end of that road. That road was long and continues to be long, but there's a good chance that there will be a meeting very soon.
Against the backdrop of growing uncertainty in India-US ties, PM Modi is expected to reach out to East Asia in the coming weeks. The Prime Minister will visit China for the first time in over 6 years, in a further sign of a diplomatic thaw with Beijing as tensions with the United States are on the rise. Modi will go to China for a summit of the Multilateral Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the SCO, that begins on the 31st of August. In the neighborhood, South Korea and the United States will launch their annual large-scale military exercise this month to bolster readiness against North Korean threats. The allies have said Thursday in a move likely to anger Pyongyang amid a prolonged stalemate in diplomacy. For perspective, around 18,000 South Korean troops will take part in this year's Ulchi Freedom Strike exercises. The American forces in Korea did not disclose the number of participating US troops. Now, this August exercise may trigger an angry reaction from North Korea, which calls the joint drills invasion rehearsals and often uses them as a pretext to dial up military demonstrations and also weapons testings aimed at advancing its nuclear program. Now, doubling down on its nuclear ambitions, North Korea has clearly repeatedly rejected Washington and Seoul's calls to resume diplomacy aimed at widening down its weapons program, which, by the way, for perspective, derailed all the way back in 2019. The North has now made Russia the priority of its foreign policy, sending thousands of troops and large amounts of military equipment to support Moscow's war in Ukraine. Shift our focus back to the United States, where a sergeant shot 5 soldiers Wednesday at one of the country's largest army bases before he was quickly tackled by other Fort Stewart troops, forcing a brief lockdown. Few details were immediately available about what led to this gunfire to begin with. However, officials said the shooter was Sergeant Cornelius Radford. Now, the 28-year-old sergeant who used a personal handgun and not a military firearm. Radford opened fire where he worked, but officials wouldn't speculate about a motive. The injured soldiers, meanwhile, are stable and expected to make a full recovery. Over in Washington, Trump says he's considering ways for the federal government to seize control of Washington. Now, he says crime is ridiculous and the city is quote-unquote unsafe. Trump renewed that idea after an attempted carjacking, in fact, and beating of one of the most prominent members of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, which was formerly, in fact, headed by Elon Musk. Meanwhile, listen into what Trump had to say on this matter.
We're considering it, yeah, because the crime is ridiculous. I could show you a chart comparing D.C. to other locations, and you're not going to want to see what it looks like. It was just up on television, actually, they were showing it. Now, we want to have a great, safe capital, and we're going to have it. And that includes cleanliness and it includes other things. We have a capital that's very unsafe. We're going to beautify the city. We're going to make it beautiful. And what a shame. The rate of crime, the rate of muggings, killings, and everything else, we're not going to let it. And that includes bringing in the National Guard, maybe very quickly, too.
The crash of a military helicopter in Ghana on Wednesday killed all 8 people aboard, including the West African country's defense and environment ministers and other top officials as well. The Ghanaian military has in fact said that the helicopter took off in the morning from capital Accra and was heading northwest towards the gold mining area of Obuasi when it went off the radar. Over in Europe, a wildfire larger than the size of Paris has engulfed southern France's Aude region, killing 1 and injuring at least 13 others. Now, the fire broke out Tuesday in the village of Ribote and has since consumed over 16,000 hectares. Authorities, meanwhile, say the fire remains quote-unquote very active and in fact continues to spread as night falls. Over 2,100 firefighters and aerial support teams are battling the inferno under severe weather conditions as we get you this update. Now, the affected region, known for its wineries and rural landscape, is grappling with a disaster described by French Prime Minister François Bayrou as unprecedented. Parts of the Great Barrier Reef have suffered the largest annual decline in coral cover since records began nearly 40 years ago. Northern and southern branches of the sprawling Australian reef both suffered their most widespread coral bleaching, the Australian Institute of Marine Science has found. Reefs have been battered in recent months by tropical cyclones and also outbreaks of a crown of thorns starfish that feast on corals. But heat stress driven by climate change is the predominant reason, the university has said. Meanwhile, the study has also warned that habitats may reach a tipping point where the coral cannot recover fast enough between catastrophic events and faces a volatile future. Life in the ancient Roman city of Pompeii did not end with the volcanic eruption of the 79 AD. New data and traces uncovered during the restoration work on the Insula Meridionalis, the southern district of Pompeii center, shows that the city was reoccupied after the eruption, presumably by survivors who returned and by people coming in from other places as well. This new human settlement existed in a disorganized and a precarious state until the 5th century AD, when Pompeii was finally abandoned. These hypotheses have already been advanced in the past, but now seem to be confirmed, in fact, by the data that emerged during the work on safety measures, restoration and consolidation of the Insula Meridionalis in Pompeii, published in the e-journal of the Pompeii excavations.